Good morning, you all. We warmly welcome you all to Candy in this 2021. And this is the first academic session of Candy Society of Medicine, which is conducted in collaboration with Sri Lankan College of Cardiologists, the certificate course on cardiology. So first, I would like to invite Dr. Dushant Madhagidara, the President of Candy Society of Medicine, for welcome speech. So over to you, sir.
Good morning. This is the first certificate course organized in 2021. Similar courses we conducted several last year, and this year also after window period of 1.5 months because of the current crisis, we thought to restart all our program as usual, in addition to our regular CME program. Now it is my great pleasure and welcome the President, Sri Lanka College of Cardiology, Dr. Anju Padirana, consultant cardiologist, and his team who came all the way from Colombo, and other consultants who came from Cable and some of them are from ours. And we today is actually joined a certificate course organized by these two colleges, ASM as well as the Sri Lanka College of Cardiology. Now, the purpose of having this certificate course to educate and update the specialized field. Now, today we are having cardiology, and particularly focusing on the postgraduates and other graduates, even students, to give us an update on common problem in that particular discipline. So, it is our task as an organization to collaborate with the respective specialized colleges to do this. We have conducted respiratory. I am representing the respiratory medicine. And we are going to have endocrinology under 2 weeks' time, neurology, geriatric, emergency medicine, so on. There are several. This is another one of the certificate course. So we have a series of lectures today, almost up to 2 o'clock, and addressing the different aspects of the cardiology, and where we expect particularly the registrars, they are sitting for MD medicine, and you will get the latest update on this particular areas of interest. You will be questioned in the short, long, YY, and all other topics. All most of us are the examiners of that, and hopefully you will enjoy the today's session and get the maximum benefit of this type of certificate course, even with the COVID pandemic. Because of even the COVID, I do not want to stop single on my work. So that's what we are conducting, adherent to the health instruction, and hopefully you will maximally utilize today's program. So without further delay, because we have a series of lectures, 10 lectures, we need to go on according to time. So I'm wishing you to have good luck today and please adhere to your health instruction. I'm requesting you to wear a mask throughout the program, because the COVID has become so common, and I do not want anyone of you to affected just because of this program. I are keeping like windows open and all those things to safeguard all of us. So we will start the program, and thanks again to the speakers as well as the participants coming and helping us to conduct this program.
Thank you very much, sir. So the first lecture is on management of acute coronary syndrome by Dr. Dharanjani Senaviratne, consultant cardiologist from Base Hospital, Kegwal. I'm inviting you, madam, for the session.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation for this lecture to Heart Association and to Dr. Madhagidara. Good morning to you all. My today's task is to discuss the current updates in management of acute coronary syndrome. To diagnose or define myocardial infarction, there should be cardiomyocyte necrosis pathologically, and it should be tallied with the clinical presentation. To diagnose, according to criteria, there should be positive cardiac biomarkers. It can be increasing or decreasing, preferably high sensitivity troponin or troponin I, with at least one of the following. Clinical features suggestive of myocardial infarction, that is typical angina or angina equivalent. New ECG changes or pathological Q wave formation in the ECG, or imaging evidence of new regional wall motion abnormality or loss of viable myocardium, or angiography or autopsy showing intracoronary thrombus. If these criteria are fulfilled, we can diagnose myocardial infarction. Subset of patients will present with typical angina or angina equivalent with ECG changes, but these patients don't have positive biomarkers. So these patients categorized under unstable angina. So they don't have myocardial injury or necrosis. So they have lower risk compared to patients with myocardial infarction for death and less benefit from intensified invasive treatment. When assessing for airway breathing circulation at the emergency room, once patient acutely presented, we have to take goal-directed history to diagnose angina. At the same time, we should do ECG. This is mainly to rule out acute ST elevations. ECG should be done within 10 minutes. If there's acute ST elevations there, we have to promptly activate the cascade for ST elevation myocardial infarction for prompt revascularization. So cardiac biomarkers also indicated on admission, and it can be repeated in 1 hour or 2 hour intervals. If patients presented with typical features of angina, with typical features of ECG changes with ST depressions and positive biomarkers at the admission, we can easily diagnose or rule in non-ST elevation myocardial infarction. If patients don't having these features, we can easily exclude acute coronary syndrome in these patients and can assess for other possible causes for the presentation. So high sensitivity troponin plays a major role here. It is preferable over standard conventional troponin because its sensitivity and high negative predictive value. It actually reduces troponin blind interval. When it comes to conventional heparin, we have to wait 6 hours roughly to get the blood test done. So with high sensitivity troponin, it reduces this delay and give the facility for early treatment of myocardial infarction. It has good diagnostic accuracy, so it is easy to rule in out myocardial infarction in acute setting. Actually, with the sensitivity assays, it increased the detection of rate of myocardial infarction. It doubled the detection of type 1 myocardial infarction detection, and reciprocally it reduced the rate of unstable angina. Before going for the management, we have to properly assess the patient's risk, specifically for thrombosis, that is ischemic episodes or ischemic complications, and the risk for bleeding, that is bleeding complications, because both these affect the patients in hospital as well as early mortality. For ischemic risk assessment, there are several scores used. Gray scores among them most popular. It predicts clinical outcomes and it is superior to physician's assessment of risk for the thrombosis in these patients. Several criteria are used: age and heart rate on admission, blood pressure on admission, etc. With that, we can categorize these patients according to risk profile. To assess bleeding risk, again, several criteria are used. Crusade criteria can be used as angiogram to assess the bleeding risk. At the same time, in European guidelines, they suggested high bleeding risk criteria as laid down here. With that, we can categorize patients to two main groups: patients with major risk for bleeding and patients with minor risk for bleeding. To categorize under major risk for bleeding, patients should have one of these features like long-term oral anticoagulation use, patients with end-stage renal failure or low hemoglobin, high bleeding risk, thrombocytopenia, cirrhosis with portal hypertension, and active malignancy, intrathecal hemorrhage or AV malformation, recent major strokes, or recent major surgery. So, when patients having these features, we have to categorize patients under major risk for bleeding and should cautious with the management of anticoagulation or antiplatelets. When patient is more than 75 years or moderate to reduced renal functions or moderate to reduced bleeding, hemoglobin or bleeding within 12 months, or use of NSAIDs or steroids or ischemic stroke at any time. If patients have one of these criteria, they should be categorized under minor risk group for bleeding. So pharmacological treatment should be laid out depending on the patient's risk category of bleeding and thrombosis. So mainly two types of drugs used here in the acute setting when we manage acute patients with acute coronary syndrome. They are anticoagulants and antiplatelets. Anticoagulants mainly directly or indirectly affect on thrombin to reduce fibrin formation. Fondaparinux, enoxaparin, unfractionated heparin, and bivalirudin, they are the parenteral anticoagulants most commonly used here. Antiplatelets will act on platelets to inhibit the function, then it will reduce the thrombus formation or burden. So when it comes to treatment, patient's characteristic, clinical presentation, comorbidities, co-medications, and procedural aspects, all these things should assess collectively to prescribe the antithrombotic treatment, assessing the bleeding risk as well as ischemia risk. So these are the commonly used antiplatelets. Aspirin, well known and well familiar. It acts through thromboxane A2 inhibition. 150 to 300 milligram loading dose is indicated, and the maintenance dose is 75 to 100. Prasugrel, ticagrelor, clopidogrel, they are P2Y12 receptor inhibitors. Compared to clopidogrel, prasugrel and ticagrelor are very potent and fast onset of action there. Prasugrel compared to ticagrelor has additional effect by improving endothelial functions, but it is contraindicated for patients with past strokes. Additionally, the loading dose of prasugrel and ticagrelor, if we are going for intervention, is only recommended after the angiogram. When we know the coronary anatomy, only we have to give the loading dose of these drugs. Because if emergency coronary artery bypass surgery is indicated, bleeding complications more with these drugs. So our friend clopidogrel, it has variable less potent effect on antiplatelets, but it is widely used in Sri Lanka. It actually should be used if about 2 drugs not available or not tolerated or contraindicated. Cangrelor is a potent intravenous, direct, and reversible platelet inhibitor, can be used in specific scenarios. When it comes to peri-interventional anticoagulant management, unfractionated heparin is the primarily indicated drug. Bivalirudin can be used in selected patients. Fondaparinux and enoxaparin can be used for patients going for conservative management, or if there's no urgent or emergency angiogram is planned. The most important thing is crossover of these anticoagulants should be minimized to minimize the bleeding complications. However, fondaparinux, patients receiving fondaparinux should have a dose of unfractionated heparin to cover catheter-related thrombosis during the intervention. These drugs should be immediately discontinued after the intervention to prevent further bleeding, except in the specific scenarios like atrial fibrillation, AV thrombosis, or prosthetic heart valves. So these are the drugs used as parenteral antiplatelet drugs. They are not routinely recommended. However, it should be used adjunctive treatment with balanced and more selective way. They are indicated in bailout situations during the procedure, during thrombotic complications or high-risk patients without antiplatelet loading, we can give IV treatment of these drugs. So during the procedure, again, we have to minimize the bleeding complications. So we should use weight-adjusted doses of anticoagulants, and proton pump inhibitors also indicated if the patient's having high risk for bleeding. Radial approach is recommended over femoral approach, again, due to less bleeding complications. If patients on anticoagulants like warfarin, if INR more than 2.5, we can proceed without a loading dose of unfractionated heparin. Patients with now oral anticoagulants, these patients, regardless of the last dose of the anticoagulant, patients should be loaded with low dose parenteral anticoagulant. So when it comes to invasive treatment, it is not recommended for all the patients coming with non-ST elevation myocardial infarction. We have to again categorize the patients according to patients' risk and mortality scenario. Patients with hemodynamic instability, recurrent or ongoing angina or life-threatening arrhythmia or mechanical complications or heart failure. These patients have very high risk to die from the myocardial infarction. So angiogram within 2 hours is recommended. If patients in the non-PCI center, patients should be transferred to a PCI center. At the same time, if specific ECG features like ST depressions in the anterior leads with ST elevations in the AVR, so these patients are also at high risk to have left main or proximal left LAD lesions. So these patients also should be sent for immediate angiogram. Then the other category of patients with non-STEMI with high-grade risk score is more than 140, or with dynamic ST changes or transient ST elevations. These patients also categorized under intermediate risk category. However, they need angiogram within 24 hours. Other patients categorized under low risk category with non-ST elevation myocardial infarction, and stress test is recommended before the intervention. And coronary CT angiogram will be used to detect the coronary endotomy in these patients, and it is recommended. So what is myocardial infarction in non-obstructive coronary artery? This is a specific scenario nowadays discussed. These patients will present with all the features with acute myocardial infarction, but there's no obstructive coronary lesions to give rise to the infarction. At the same time, these patients should not have other critical explanations like sepsis or anything to cause the presentation. So most of the time, young females are common to present with this problem, and patients with multiple risk factors are less common to present with this menocarp. When we talk about prognosis, better prognosis is there when we compare with the patients with coronary artery disease. However, prognosis is poor when we compare with the patients with normal population. To diagnose this, we have to exclude myocarditis and Takotsubo cardiomyopathy-like conditions. So their cardiac MRI is very important to rule out these conditions. In-hospital left ventricular function assessment is mandatory in this category. At the same time, as pulmonary embolism is very life-threatening condition, if it is clinically indicated, it should be excluded in these patients with D-dimer or CTPA. Other specific group is called spontaneous coronary artery dissection. This is also fine during the angiogram. It is common in females with fibromuscular dysplasia. For these patients, stenting is recommended only if there's obstructive flow-limiting coronary lesions. After the intervention, when we go in for the management, we again should reassess the patient's risk and benefit, risk for thrombosis and bleeding. Here, when we assess the thrombotic risk, we have to get the angiogram criteria also. If patients have complex coronary artery disease with one of the following, these patients will go categorized under high risk patient for thrombosis. patients with vascular risk factors, multiple vessel disease, ongoing inflammation, or premature or accelerated atherosclerosis or chronic kidney disease. These patients will categorized under high risk. Additionally, angiographic features like multiple stent in use, long stent in use, previous stent thrombosis or special stents in the left main or bifurcation lesions also categorized under this category. When patients having done complex coronary heart disease in the angiogram with the cardiovascular risk factors or chronic kidney disease, these patients we can categorize under moderate risk for thrombosis. So later in the management plan for the dual antiplatelet is very important, the patient's risk factor and bleeding profile. So dual antiplatelets is indicated unless contraindicated with potent antiplatelet like ticagrelor or prasugrel with aspirin for 12 months. If there's no complication or bleeding problem, after 12 months, we can revise patient for extended use of these drugs. It has class 2A and class 2B recommendation. There's also, according to guideline, we can use dual antiplatelet aspirin and ticagrelor for 3 months with ticagrelor alone after that, but it has class 2 recommendation. Patients with very high risk group, these patients can only be used with aspirin and clopidogrel combination for only for 1 month. After that, we have to continue clopidogrel alone because aspirin has high risk profile against GI bleed. Patients with intermediate risk, we only give aspirin and clopidogrel combination for 3 months. After that, we can continue aspirin alone. So with the time, if patients develop bleeding complications, we can de-escalate the antiplatelet therapy according to clinical judgment. When patients come in with long-term anticoagulant use for conditions like atrial fibrillation, prosthetic heart valve, or LV thrombus, these patients, when we prescribe antiplatelet, it should be cautious. So early angiogram is considered for these patients because it is easy to lay down the management plan. If patients on vitamin K antagonists, as mentioned previously, anticoagulant is indicated only if INR less than 2.5. The most important thing here to continue uninterrupted therapeutic anticoagulation in these patients. If we recommend dual antiplatelets with oral anticoagulant, that is triple therapy, the target INR is 2 to 2.5 in these patients with target therapeutic ratio around 70%. When we come to triple therapy, ticagrelor or prasugrel are not indicated because they are very potent. At the same time, triple therapy is equal to dual therapy with oral anticoagulant with ticagrelor or prasugrel. If you are going for medical management, single antiplatelet with oral anticoagulant for 1 year is recommended with combination with clopidogrel most of the time. When patients having active bleeding or chronic bleeding, maintenance hemoglobin more than 8 milligram is the target. This algorithm showing the management of patients with atrial fibrillation and acute coronary syndrome. Default therapy is triple therapy for 1 week. After that, dual therapy with oral anticoagulant and single antiplatelet for another 1 year, and then oral anticoagulant alone. If patients having high risk for ischemia, we can extend the triple therapy for 1 month, then go for the double therapy. If patients are in high risk for bleeding, we can start dual therapy only for 6 months, then go for the oral anticoagulant alone therapy. So there are special category of patients coming with acute coronary syndrome. They have high mortality and poor prognosis. So, they are patients with heart failure, cardiogenic shock. They have 2 to 4 times high mortality risk compared to other patients without complications. It is very challenging to diagnose these patients because they can have chest discomfort and positive troponin without coronary obstruction. And ECG interpretation also very difficult because of the underlying left bundle branch block or STOQ changes. Emergency echo is indicated for these patients to assess regional bone motion. in the left ventricle and right ventricular functions and mechanical complications, etc. If patients unstable, emergency angiogram is indicated. However, multi-vessel disease is common in these patients. Intra-aortic balloon pump or ECMO, if available, can be used as bridging therapy, but there's no mortality benefit shown in these patients with these interventions. Patients with diabetes, again, has poor prognosis. They will most of the time present with atypical presentations and tend to have multifocal disease due to high clinical risk profile. And blood sugar target for these patients is not that strict. Main aim to avoid hypoglycemia because it is associated with mortality. Multifactorial approach is important in patients with diabetes to give the optimized treatment in the management. Some set of patients will present with hyperglycemia only during the acute episode of acute coronary syndrome. These patients' blood sugar will be normalized after that. These patients will be wrongly diagnosed as diabetes in the hospital setting. Patients with chronic kidney disease also has poor prognosis compared to other people. They tend to get less frequently evidence-based treatment because of the renal dysfunction. Renal function should be assessed on admission to lay down the management plan to protect the kidneys from contrast-induced nephropathy and to assess the risk. Mild ECG changes and mildly elevated troponin is common in these patients. So again, it is difficult to diagnose sometimes. So serial troponin test and ECG testing is important. Prevention of contrast-induced nephropathy with hydration is the main way of prevention of contrast-induced nephropathy. At the same time, if troponin is negative in these patients, we can easily rule out acute non-ST elevation myocardial infarction. But if it is positive, it shows the higher risk, double the risk of having cardiac events within 1 year in this category of patients. So dose adjustment is indicated according to renal profile. Anemia is another common scenario found with the angina or acute coronary syndromes. These associated with high mortality, recurrent myocardial infarctions, and major bleedings. And treatment per se for the ACS will increase the bleeding. Should identify the cause if possible and treat it. Intervention and antithrombotic medication should carefully prescribe for these patients. If drug-eluting is recommended, only new generation devices is recommended to reduce the duration of dual antiplatelet treatment in these patients. Elderly people, they should receive the same treatment strategies as young patients, and they show this mortality benefit with invasive strategies. And however, bleeding risk should be closely assessed and adjust the doses of antiplatelets and anticoagulants. Frailty is a very common phenomenon nowadays with the growing population. It is a syndrome with reduced biological reserve and failure of homeostatic mechanism after stresses. These patients less likely to receive full spectrum of ACS treatment. They have a high chance to get multiple complex coronary artery disease, lengthy hospital stays, and risk of death from the myocardial infarction. So treatment should be balanced carefully against the risk for these patients as well. When it comes to long-term mortality benefit pharmacological treatment, statin plays a major role. Patients should be on high-intensity statin, and lipid profile should be done during the hospital admission. LDL goal is more than 50% reduction or less than 55 milligrams deciliter target. For patients with recurrent angina or ACS, we have to go for strict LDL targets less than 40 milligrams deciliter. If target not achieved, we can add ezetimibe or PCSK9 inhibitors. Patients with low ejection fraction, CKD diabetes has additional benefit with ACE inhibitors or ARB, beta blockers, and spironolactone. Proton pump inhibitors can be used concomitant with aspirin to reduce GI bleed. Rehabilitation and secondary prevention also important in the management of acute coronary syndrome patients. Improvement of lifestyle factors, cognitive behavioral interventions, multidisciplinary exercise-based cardiac rehabilitation with the involvement of multidisciplinary healthcare professionals, and psychological interventions when it is recommended, and annual influenza vaccination. These are recommended under class 1 recommendation for these patients. And new area is introduced with the newer guidelines, quality measures. These quality measures are there to assess the quantification of the adherence to guideline-based recommendations in the institution. These measures not to rank the institution, but to increase the quality of the guideline-based recommendations. With that, we can assess the institution with the availability of high sensitivity troponin or the maintenance of registries with these patients, and the rate of angiogram for the non-ST elevation myocardial infarction patients, or radial proportion of patients using radial access for the intervention, etc. So these measures are there to assess the quality of the institution. With that, we can improve the guideline adherence of the institution, ultimately will increase the patient benefit. So what is new in new ESC guidelines in the management of patients with acute coronary syndrome? First thing is on admission, high sensitivity troponin assay, and repeat it in 1 or 2 hours intervals. At the same time, no other cardiac biomarkers indicated to diagnose the acute coronary syndrome. And BNP or NT-BNP can be used if available only to assess the prognosis. Prasugrel should be considered over ticagrelor for patients with acute coronary syndrome going for intervention, as it has additional benefit. And preloading before the angiogram with the potent dual antiplatelets not indicated, and de-escalation is recommended according to clinical judgment. When it comes to antithrombotic treatment with anticoagulation, triple therapy is indicated for 1 week, with the dual antiplatelet therapy hereafter with an oral anticoagulant and one single antiplatelet. And both dual antiplatelet therapy should be discontinued after 12 months in these patients and should be only on oral anticoagulant. Early invasive strategies recommended for patients with high risk for mortality and further ischemic episodes. At the same time, selective invasive strategies recommended for patients with low risk category with the stress testing or CT coronary angiogram. When it comes to out-of-hospital cardiac arrest and hemodynamically stable patients, delayed intervention is recommended opposed to immediate intervention. Complete revascularization should be tried if possible in all patients. FFR will be used to guide the intervention in non-culprit lesions. So myocardial infarction of non-obstructive coronary arteries, spontaneous coronary artery dissection, and quality measures are new sections they suggested. At the same time, revised or new concepts they are actually very important. Rapid rule in and rule out algorithm, risk stratification of the early invasive approach, definition of high bleeding risk categories, and definition of high and very high ischemic risk categories are very important and emphasized in these guidelines. At the same time, they discuss about the gap between the randomized control trials. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, madam, for this descriptive lecture on acute coronary syndrome. If you have burning questions, you can ask 1 or 2 quickly. Okay, in the absence of any questions, I would like to invite Dr. Dushantha Madhagedara to hand over the token of appreciation.